Hello, you are listening to the Wellness Project with Des. I'm your host, Desiree, a mental health therapist and holistic wellness coach. On my podcast, I interview experts in the field of mental health and wellness, as well as those who share their firsthand accounts of their mental health journeys. These interviews will give you many tips, tools, and strategies to improve your mental health, as well as give you hope, support, encouragement, and inspiration on your own personal mental health and wellness journey. Thanks so much for being here. I would greatly appreciate it if you took a moment to leave me a review on iTunes and leave the podcast 5 stars on Spotify. It really helps the podcast to grow, which in turn helps me to keep bringing on amazing guests and spreading mental health and wellness education and support. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey towards holistic well-being, unlocking the full potential of your mind, body, and spirit? If so, I'm thrilled to invite you to my program, the Holistic Wellness Transformation Coaching Program. My one-to-one coaching program is a comprehensive and individualized approach to help you improve your overall well-being. As a holistic wellness coach, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey to attain balance and harmony in all areas of your life. With personalized coaching sessions, I'll offer guidance and support throughout your wellness journey. Starting with a thorough holistic assessment. We'll dive into your past, habits, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and patterns that may be holding you back and no longer serving you. This assessment forms the foundation for your customized wellness plan. Together, we'll explore the 8 foundational elements of wellness to ensure you feel balanced and aligned with your goals and your values. This program goes beyond the surface, providing you with mental and emotional support. I will help you to manage stress, anxiety, and other challenges such as perfectionism and people-pleasing, offering techniques and strategies to enhance your resilience and your skills. The benefits of this program cannot be overstated. I'll be there every step of the way to support you in achieving balance and harmony in your life, manage stress, and improve your emotional well-being. Nurture healthy connections, create lasting, healthy habits, achieve your goals, and gain confidence in your ability to transform your life. Join me on this journey to holistic wellness. You could go to my website to check out my various packages, and you could go to my Calendly link found in the show notes to schedule a free 30-minute consultation call where we will go over the 8 core areas of wellness, as well as your goals and your dream life. Reach out and let's get started on your wellness journey so you can finally live the life you want. Hey there, I'm your host Des. You are listening to episode number 180, and on today's episode I am speaking with Janis Isaman. Janis is speaking with us about trauma-sensitive movement. Janis is a trauma-sensitive movement specialist, and she's talking with us today about the transformative power, the positive impact that movement has on healing from trauma, on releasing trauma from the body. This is such an important conversation because movement can be such a profound experience. Just moving your body, releasing what is trapped in your body, it can have such a positive impact on your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health. And as we've talked about before a lot of different times on this podcast, is that we are living a sedentary lifestyle. So many of us are disconnected from our bodies, disconnected from the sensations in our bodies. And our bodies are always speaking to us. Our bodies are always sending us messages. And so often we're ignoring our bodies and what they're trying to tell us. I'm so glad that Janis is here with us today to talk with us about the importance of movement and the positive impact, the profound impact that movement can have on our mental health and our well-being. Help me welcome Janis. All right, I am here with Janis Isaman. Janis, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and we are talking all about trauma-sensitive movement. So before we get into that, I would love if you could take some time to introduce yourself, share your story with us.
Essentially, I'm a movement specialist, which is kind of a bit of a fancy way of saying that I combine a whole bunch of different movement modalities, most of which you would be familiar with, things like yoga, Pilates, and then a few that you're probably not as familiar with, including critical alignment therapy, Yamana body rolling, and some other tools. And then I have also got multiple designations in trauma, and some of those are not specific to movement. Some of them are specific to movement. So essentially what happens is when someone comes to see me, I'm plucking different tools out of the toolbox to help people feel better in their bodies. I arrived at this destination, a long pathway with kind of a simple premise. I evolved over the course of 18 or so years to provide the kinds of services that I personally was seeking and looking for. And, I can look back years and years ago and say, oh man, I wish that I'd really had all of this available to me. But at that time, I didn't even know what pieces were missing. So kind of as I have evolved as a woman with a body who exercises and moves in my daily life, as well as observing and working with clients, every time I hit a challenge or I feel like I'm not certain how to work with it or how to be more effective, faster, more efficient, people aren't kind of getting it, or it's not moving in the direction that's helpful to people or myself, then I have added additional certifications. So at this point, there's a whole pile of them because it's just kind of a constant search for knowledge and solutions and trying to help other people as well as myself. It's kind of always a bit of a parallel pathway because I am a person with a body who moves and exercises.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And before we get into, I have so many questions for you, but before we get into all of that, can you first start with letting us know what exactly is trauma sensitive movement?
Yeah, so the specific words trauma sensitive actually refer to a very specific designation that I have. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's called trauma center, trauma sensitive yoga. So for those out there who are familiar with Bessel van der Kolk and perhaps have read or heard about the book, The Body Keeps the Score, he has an institute in Boston and about 20 years ago was looking at movement modalities that might help with trauma. So the underpinning of his work is that the body, rather than the brain, is what responds to trauma. Basically, trauma is an event that overwhelmed the body, and it changes how our nervous system responds to different events in our lives. And those don't have to be traumatic events happening in the present moment necessarily. It changes how we perceive things. It changes our cortisol. It changes our musculature, etc. So that book goes into a lot of depth, but essentially, because the way that we experience trauma is a state of overwhelm, basically, in the body, there isn't really a talk therapy per se that can help us get rid of that. So we have to move through that process by way of the body. And there's more ways than just movement to do that. So, some of the examples that I can think of that are in that book include things like art, dancing, music, but then, of course, movement. So about 20 years ago, he paired with a man named David Emerson, who has written a couple of books on this topic. And that became what is now known as trauma center, trauma sensitive yoga. So that's a really specific designation for both therapists and movement specialists, body workers, people like that. It's people with professions where they're already working with trauma exposed populace. And then we have really specific evidence-based tools and practices and protocols that we can help people move through trauma with. I've used the word movement as opposed to yoga for a couple of different reasons. One is because I generally find that as soon as we use the word yoga, the first thing that people will say to me is, I'm not flexible. And there's a whole narrative and a whole story about what comes with the word yoga in our North American culture. So often it means a certain way to dress, a certain kind of smell, perhaps. We need fancy props and expensive tools, etc. And this particular protocol doesn't require any of that. First, it kind of helps people step away from that idea that we're going to be doing a specific set of poses or postures, that we have to have all of this stuff around it. But the second reason that I have moved away from using the word yoga is because I actually have a whole other set of disciplines. And so I'm able to infuse those principles into all of my movement modalities. And so when I have a referral for a client from a therapist, for example, and it is somebody with a really specific trauma exposure, they might be resistant to treatment. We're going to move through something that looks very pure form, trauma center, trauma sensitive yoga. If I have somebody who is not in that position, we're still going to use those trauma-based tools, but it's not necessarily going to be really specific. Let's do the 10-week evidence-based program. But every single way that I teach is informed by that course and that designation. And there's no way to unwind that, which is a positive. So every person coming to me is getting that trauma sensitive work, whether they are coming in for trauma sensitive reasons or not.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for explaining that, because I was wondering what the difference was between this trauma sensitive movement and physical therapy, Pilates, yoga. So it sounds like it's a lot of combination and client centered.
Each of these modalities that you listed off have a lot of things that are similar and a lot of things that are different. So, for example, a physiotherapist is often able to diagnose underlying conditions, quite often physiotherapists, and not all of them, but are working with really specific conditions or something that is really specific. Let's say, for example, someone has an accident or illness or a certain kind of pain, and they're often referred to a doctor or something of that nature. Often somebody will come to Pilates because they want, and I'm going to use kind of cliche words, but they want lengthening and they want tone and they want core strength. They want things like that. So quite often there's really specific goals associated with that. Somebody's coming for trauma sensitive movement. I get a couple kinds of clients and they're almost a combination of what I just named off. So I'll often get people who are in pain. And quite often I prefer to work with people, actually, to be honest, who have gone to a physiotherapist, an acupuncturist, a massage therapist, et cetera. And probably ideally they've had some medical tests. And I had this experience myself, but where they've gone to these practitioners, they've had relief, and then the pain comes back. So at that point, we know for sure that not all pain is caused by trauma, but the trauma exposure can create pain in people's bodies. So when we're looking at kind of non-specific pain, I would be a good practitioner to come to, as opposed to a physiotherapist where they're going to look at your knee, or you have arthritis, or you have a runner's knee problem. I can work with some of those conditions as well. But if you know that it's a really specific body illness or injury, I might not be the best practitioner. If it's something that's kind of amorphous, where you are looking to move better, you're looking to integrate that emotional component into it, as well as, really, we used to call it mind body movement. And that's really my specialty, where we're really looking at that merging between the mind and the body. In the time that I've been certified, these worlds and these little pockets used to be super different, where physio and Pilates and yoga and personal training and trauma work and therapy, they were all really different. And over the time that I've been around and certified, there's been a movement towards the middle in a lot of ways. And so sometimes those lines do get a little bit blurred, and it becomes a little bit hard to figure out, like, what is this exactly? And part of that is because, just, for myself, like a physiotherapist, we're not necessarily only using one tool, one modality, one kind of training. So most physiotherapists will do a lot of different techniques. I do too. And it's really the underlying goal that I have is, let's work with choice, interoception. Let's work with body awareness. Let's work with moving in a really functional way. And the tools that I'm using, I'm not super attached to whether somebody's doing yoga or body rolling or Pilates. That's the tool that's used to get the outcome. So that's a lot of words to kind of say. These things are often similar, but they often are quite different as well. So some of the really different pieces of my training are going to be that trauma work, which is really based on choice and interoception, attuning to the client, things like that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm just curious, how did you stumble upon all of this?
That is the $1,000,000 question. So I personally had a knee injury, and just like the kind of ideal client that I explained earlier, I went to a whole bunch of practitioners. I would get kind of temporary relief. They were great practitioners, so that wasn't really the problem. But as soon as I would go about my daily life, the pain would come back. So the very first avenue that really piqued my attention and helped my body was actually Pilates. So that is what I still to this day consider my base training. And when I say that, what I really mean is, I still really value the core. I really value functional movement. I really value the skills that Pilates can teach in terms of how you do anything is how you do everything, etc. But what I noticed, and this is true of every single system, and if I was to write a training program today, it would be true of my system too. There's always a limitation to every system. So after finishing that training, I did it long enough ago that I was mostly in training with dancers, and I am not a dancer. So it takes me longer to learn things. Everything is just more challenging for me. And my range of motion is much smaller. So then I stumbled on something I've referred to a few times called Yamana body rolling. And that's really about opening space in the body. So that helped me a lot. And I had those two in combination for a number of years and noticed what a huge impact that would make on people. But Yamana body rolling is a form of body work. So although it reads like exercise, it really is body work. And so after I opened my studio, what I noticed was that I usually give people a home-based practice so that they can work on different skills and different forms of education in between our sessions. And they would start to have emotional responses when they were with me. So they would cry or they would share really deep personal experiences. And at that point, I went to a therapist and I was like, what do I do with this? So particularly kind of in those mind body realms, we talk about how it's mind body, but there was nothing in my trainings. There wasn't kind of a here's how we work with it, here's what we do with it, here what could happen. So there was a lot of conversation about how it was my, and what that really means is we're focusing on that word I've used a few times again, interoception. I can feel my leg, I can feel that my arm is moving, etc. So it's kind of working on that component, but nothing was really addressing what was actually happening. So at that point, that was not that long actually after I opened my business, and my therapist friend pointed me in the direction of trauma work. And I wasn't familiar with this at all. So it actually ended up changing my life and my practice. And it was precisely the missing piece where when we do mind body work and we are calling upon that interoception and we are doing these functional movement and body work, emotions might come up and they might come forward. And in the yoga community, kind of what I had encountered was people will talk about that's like a spiritual release or that's a spiritual awakening or something of that nature. But that didn't really land with me. I knew that there was something else going on for myself and even to some extent my clients. So that's what kind of opened that door to start the trauma training. And subsequently, obviously that word and that piece really became quite culturally pervasive. But it often is confusing to people, to be honest. So what we're really talking about is an extension on a lot of levels of kind of what mind and body means, where we can connect to the body, we notice sensation, and then we're able to move through that emotion. So it doesn't just sort of get stuck. We're not relying on coping mechanisms. It's fine if it happens, but we're not kind of hanging on to things and processing it 20 years later.
Okay. Yeah, there's so much here. And so, what are some reasons that you believe that we are so disconnected from our bodies?
I mean, my personal experience, and I want to kind of caveat this and say, like, I'm not a sociologist or I'm not an anthropologist, et cetera. So perhaps somebody out there listening who has a better answer to this. But I know my own personal experience is that our whole culture is set up for us to disconnect from our bodies. So we really work even in elementary school with here's the rhythm, here's the routine, here's the expectation of work. And a lot of what we're training is around productivity. And that serves a certain purpose. So I'm not saying that that's wrong or bad. I mean, I think a grade one classroom where you didn't kind of have some structure and regulation, and here's lunchtime, and here's when we go to the bathroom, et cetera, would just be, absolute pandemonium. But from that early age, we're really disconnecting from, I need to move. I need to get up and wiggle around. I need to eat. I need to go to the bathroom, and doing that kind of according to our own body rhythms. So again, I know why everything is kind of set up that way, but we're often still really, from a very young age, trained and conditioned to sit down, focus, be productive, sit still, etc., as opposed to tune into the body's rhythms, eat, move, sleep, and kind of do all of these things according to our own capacities. And then many of us have challenging circumstances without a lot of community, without a lot of support, etc. So there's kind of a confluence of events and activities that for most people lead to growing up and just not having a ton of body awareness. I think as well, even if none of that had ever applied to you in your life, I, on a daily basis, see the heavy impact of what sitting at a desk for somewhere between 8 and 15 hours a day does to people's bodies. It's really hard to understate that, because in order to do that task, which our human body was not designed to do, to sit, we have to actually tune out to a certain extent. So again, I think there's a lot, from a young age where we're kind of trained and conditioned to do that. And then what our jobs typically require us to do. A big skill and a big piece of what I'm teaching people is, what do you feel? Where do you feel it? And then I'm giving them guided exercises or telling them what I'm seeing with my eyes and asking them if that matches their body, tuning into certain body parts, asking them what their experience is. And my experience with doing that for many years is, I can't think of anybody who's ever been like, oh yeah, I've done this before. So I think even in our education system or our home life, there isn't really kind of that guidance anywhere. The only place it really exists is when we kind of get into therapy. And that tends to even be, therapists at the end of it typically aren't heavily trained on the body. So there is a skill level there for sure, and usually a certain level of training, but it's very different than going to somebody who works specifically with the body to kind of work with that for an hour. The answer is it's complex, but most of us just we're not set up to focus on that. We're set up to focus on our body as a productivity and aesthetic object that we get to do what we need it to do, as opposed to let's listen to the body.
Oh, I fully agree with that. Yeah, 100%. And just as you said, our society is set up that we're just very sedentary now and, in school working. So, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, if somebody wants to begin to notice and experience their bodily sensations and the messages that their body is sending them, how can they start with that?
That's a great question. So first, I just want to say that idea for a lot of people is really scary, because often when we kind of enter into that conversation, it is very similar to if you delve into the world of intuitive eating, etc. People have a strong fear that if we stop controlling the body and stop forcing the body, that we're just going to go into this like disgusting, like I'm never going to exercise. I'm never going to actually go to work again because my body's going to tell me just to like rest and stay at home. So first, I just want to assure you that, and everybody listening, that is not ever the case. So typically developing more body awareness and more connection to our body's signals helps us fine tune what's happening. And yes, at certain points we might rest more, but typically, again, my experience over 18 years of teaching people is that they actually exercise more. They usually eat a little better. They usually make sure that they get sleep in ways that are productive. That one comes up a lot, where people just are really afraid that if we start being intuitive and following our body, that we're going to drop all the structure that we've learned and it's all going to go to hell and we're going to be a big sloth. So that's not ever true. The process of doing it, generally speaking, so I guess there's kind of two answers I'll give you. One is if you are a trauma exposed individual, it's going to be a lot harder on your own because trauma exposure disconnects you from your body. That's where kind of coming into that idea of what do you feel, where do you feel it? I've had people that feel almost nothing in their bodies. So if that's where you're starting, I actually genuinely would recommend working with a practitioner because it's going to be really hard for you to tune into your body in a really deeper way without a lot of frustration. If you are not a trauma exposed person or you do not consider yourself that way, I would certainly start with the world of yoga, potentially Pilates. If you can find a trauma informed instructor, that's probably going to be a good path for you. In those worlds, the idea is going to be to tune into and fine tune your skill set in tuning into your body. And those are often going to be really related to exercise, which is why I like it as a tool to connect to your body, because it's a lot easier if you have a strong skill set in, I can feel my glute when I squat. You're also likely to be able to discern that from, I have tension from squeezing my glute because I'm emotionally stressed. So I literally had that conversation with a client today. She came in with some tightness in her abdomen, and we had a whole conversation how this that she felt today was from exercise that she had done in the last few days, which was totally different than trauma or stress, which was often appearing in the past. And so she could discern the difference between my muscles are tense because I'm holding stress or tension trauma versus my muscles are sore because I use them. In a really simple way, it's what do I feel? Where do I feel it? And if you're able to do that to some extent while you exercise, that helps build and strengthen that skill set. There's a lot of layers to that because when I work with someone, we're doing that for an hour and it's, there's subtlety and nuance to it. But if you don't have a practitioner or you want to just start working on your own, that's what I would do.
That's really helpful. So are you able to kind of explain, I know you said it's, different for everybody, but what can somebody expect when they're coming in for a session? How may a typical session, how might one look?
Yeah. So when somebody starts with me, and of course, again, I can't kind of speak to every practitioner who's doing this work or something similar, but the first thing that I have someone do is a bit of and I'm going to put some heavy quotations around this, movement assessment. So I actually use my Pilates machine to do that. But what it's going to do is facilitate that introductory conversation, which is a lot in a way less awkward format than what do you feel and where do you feel it? So I'll get them to do something called footwork, which really resembles essentially squatting or sitting and standing. So a Pilates machine has weights and it has a bed and then there's a big frame. So basically somebody's feet are on the frame, there's some spring tension, and then their body is on the piece that moves. So the person's legs will start off in a bent position and then they will straighten them. So what happens with that conversation is, because I've been teaching for a long time, my eyes are trained to see certain pieces of their body that work or don't work in a certain way. So a great example would be, I see that your two legs are operating differently. So can you feel that one of your legs may be pushing more than the other leg? And I always let them know that, there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. You don't have to agree with me. But most commonly what somebody will say is, I didn't notice that. But now that you point that out, yes, I do notice that. On the first session, we don't try to change anything. So that's really important, is that I am trained to do quote unquote corrective movements. And Pilates is often known for that, but I don't do that. So I used to, but I don't anymore. So what we're trying to work with is, what is your level of awareness? What words are you using? What do you notice versus not notice? What do you notice when I pull your attention to that area of your body? And what areas do you not notice? So we often, in my work, will start with kind of that assessment around the hip area. So we're kind of looking at, your pelvis, your glutes, your inner thighs, your outer bum, things like that. Then in subsequent sessions, we'll kind of often dig into the abs and other body parts, but usually I don't do the abs the first session because that one can be a little bit activating or frustrating. I'll do that for about 20 to 30 minutes. And by that point, we kind of start to have a really good sense of what can the person feel, what can they access. And again, we're not delving into any emotions. We're not kind of looking at like, let's heal trauma through a conversation. It's really, what is that person's capacities for interoception, for access? And some people don't have any, and some people it's really strong. So that's part of also where that kind of trauma training comes into play, because if somebody's really trauma exposed, in 30 minutes, maybe delving into 2 body parts is exhausting, and they've disconnected and checked out, and we're done with that. And that's okay. Other people have full access to that. So it's kind of using that first half an hour as the base from which everything else is formulated. So I'll use mirroring language. I will kind of get a sense of where the person feels confident, where we're not kind of connecting, what body parts they can really feel versus not, and what level of nuance is there. And then also, obviously as a practitioner with a lot of experience, I can see certain things with my eyeballs and how much that is reflected in what they're noticing and able to name. And then from that point forward, then that's what I build their program with. So when someone first starts, I have no idea what a program is going to look like. Honestly, every single day that they come in, their program will change based on kind of what they're presenting. Everybody's program looks totally different, because based on what your body is kind of communicating, that's how we're going to program. And that includes the different exercise that I choose. And by that, I specifically mean some people have a lot of yoga in their programming. Some people have lots of Pilates. Some people have a lot of the ball work. Some people have a lot of trauma sensitive yoga. So we really follow the body, but I do start everybody with kind of that really similar base, so that I have that kind of toolkit to be like, okay, this is where I think we're going to go with that. And then we kind of jump in from there.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for explaining that. I think that'll give people a really good idea of what to expect. That's really helpful. Janice, this has been so amazing, so helpful, so informative. I would love if you could share where everyone can find you.
My business is called My Body Couture, and on any social media site where I'm active, that's also the handle that you can find me on. So you're welcome to hop over to my website. I post mostly podcasts there as kind of resources. Not the best on social media, but I am the best in terms of connecting and engaging. So to be honest, I actually prefer if people send me DMs and engage that way if they have specific questions or they're looking for certain content.
All right, great. Everyone, I'm going to link all that in the show notes. And Janice, do you have any last words of wisdom or advice for our listeners?
Yeah, I think something that we didn't really delve into at all, but I think is really important because it's a really core piece of my messaging, is the difference between exercise and movement. So I think often when we start hearing about terms like yoga and Pilates, etc., we think of that as exercise. And the difference really between exercise and movement is that exercise is something where you carve out time in your day and you go do a specific discipline. I named some of those. Movement is what we do all day, every day. So whether you are standing up to change your laundry, or you're cleaning your bathtub, or you're taking a walk down the street to go get a coffee, that's movement. And so my goal really with everyone, including myself, and I do practice what I preach, is that we have more movement in our life, and that it's quality movement where we're connected to the body. So everything that I'm doing is really focused on helping people develop that skill set so that we can incorporate movement comfortably, energetically, in an engaged way, according to our body and what we need into our lives. So I think that that's really the message that I want to leave, is if you're like, ugh, exercise, I don't want to do it. There are different ways to kind of approach that or to incorporate it into your life. And I always like to say, when we look at our step counters in North America, or we look at the number of people with gym memberships, it's consistently something like 15 or 20% of the populace is getting the recommended healthy levels. So that means for 75 to 80% of us, that messaging isn't working. So that's really helpful to know that there's other approaches, there's other ways that we can make this work for us. So looking at ways to make movement a part of life as opposed to exercise might be helpful for somebody out there.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. So true. I fully agree. That makes so much sense. Janice, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story and your expertise. I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people.
I hope so. I think it can be really life changing. So I hope that it opens an amazing door for at least one person.
I definitely think it will. Thank you so much for the work that you do. I really hope that you liked this episode and gained a lot of value from it. If you did like this episode, please share it on social media. You can tag me at The Wellness Project with Des on Instagram and at According to Des on Facebook. If you do enjoy my podcast and gain value from it, I would greatly appreciate your support. You can show your love and support by buying me a coffee. This will help my podcast to grow and in turn will help me to keep bringing on amazing guests. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/The Wellness Project with Des to show your support. All books written by or recommended by my amazing podcast guests are listed on my Amazon storefront. Go to the link in the show notes to check out those books. I would love to extend an invite to you to become a part of my community. You can do this through Facebook, where we will be discussing this episode. I would love for you to share your insights, any aha moments, any thoughts or ideas you would like to contribute. You can contribute in the discussion taking place in my Facebook group, and it's a great place to connect with me because I am in there every day with mental health and wellness content, discussions, reflections, journal prompts. It's a fun and supportive place to be. You can find the group at facebook.com/groups/According to Des, and that link will also be in the show notes. You can also check out more of what I'm doing on my website, accordingtodes.com. You'll find a lot of wellness blogs, written interviews, detailed podcast show notes, and my shop, where you will be able to find workshops, my self-care course, digital downloads, ebooks. There's a lot going on my website, so make sure you check that out at accordingtodes.com. And while you're there, join my email list to stay in the know about what I have going on and available for you. When you sign up, you will get your free ebook, The 5 Stress Reduction Techniques to help you feel more relaxed. Thank you so much for being here. I will talk to you next week. So until then, I hope you have a calm and peaceful week.